This Choircast podcast is brought to you by Heretic 2 by Matthew J. DiStefano. Ready to challenge everything you thought you knew about faith? In Heretic 2, I dive into LGBTQ affirmation, rejecting divine violence, and embracing universalism in a bold post-Christian perspective. If you're done with outdated dogma and want a justice-oriented, inclusive view of spirituality, then this book is for you. Get Heretic 2 wherever books are sold and start rethinking faith today. This Choircast podcast is brought to you by High Minds. Join host Andy Colenso and Matthew J. DiStefano as they tackle culture, justice, spirituality, and all the big questions shaping our world. High Minds isn't about talking points or hot takes. It's about deep, insightful conversation that inspires and challenges. Tune in to explore new angles, question the status quo, and elevate your thinking. Listen to High Minds wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Radical Love Life, an ongoing series of conversations with thought leaders exploring faith outside the boxes. Hosted by Mark Dilcomb and Kelly Wilson.
Hey, Mark.
Hello, Kelly.
How are you?
I'm freaking awesome.
Cool. You look freaking awesome. Like bright. It's just like it's a rainy, gray day. And
Right.
You're just like bright.
That's right.
Positive
Right.
and-
I'm bringing it in here.
I love that.
Let's
I love
lighten up
that.
the room.
Yeah.
How are you, my friend?
I'm good. It's been
You're
a long week. I'm
Good.
kind of tired.
Yeah.
I passed a guy on the highway on the way over here. Here I'm like my Subaru with literally like rainbow peace sign on the back. And this guy's got not one, not two, 3 flags flying in the back of his pickup truck.
Nice.
Yeah. There's
Except for what did the flag say?
well, the first one was American flag, and I'm like, I'm
Cool.
American.
Oh, okay.
I
We
get
get that.
that.
Yep,
I mean,
yep.
maybe you're a little insecure about your patriotism, but
Okay.
and there's a Trump one, and I'm like, if
Mm.
you're still a fan at this point, you're not going to get it or you like it. Like that's
Yeah, there's
you
no
know,
in between, right?
And then the last one was like God and guns, and I was like, I can't.
God and guns, huh?
Yeah, they're going to radicalize me yet. Anyways,
I laugh out of the craziness of it. It pleases, not the humor. It's just the irony out of God and guns. Like,
yeah,
that's that's oxymoronic in of itself. But
Yeah.
okay, hey. Yeah. All right. I'm glad you were here. So we got another episode. Yes, sir.
Yes, we're very excited to welcome back Melanie Hood-Wilson, good friend of ours from down
Yes.
in the Baltimore area. She's the leader of Melanie Hood-Wilson and Associates, who provide services in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Hot
Yeah.
topic of
We're going to be talking about that, I bet.
just a little bit of their
Yeah.
company description. Consulting company providing services designed to teach, enlighten, and change lives through teaching, learning, diversity, equity, inclusion. It's interesting. It says, as America strives to be a more inclusive nation, we can talk about that right off the bat, that they are trying to improve cultural competency and increase the representation of communities of color, women, individuals with differing abilities, the LGBTQIA community, and those of diverse religious and national backgrounds. And then prior to being a consultant, Melanie was a teacher in middle school, at community college, and has many accolades and recognitions. But anyway, we're here today. Melanie, welcome.
Hi, thank you so
Hi.
much.
Absolutely. It's great to have you back, Melanie. So, there is a huge potential customer for you. This is right down the road from Baltimore. It's 1600 Pence. Only hope that they could get some stuff from you. So,
You know, I really would love some new clients, but I'm also very careful what clients I take on. I like to actually get paid for my work. And the word on the street is that client is a little negligent
that is
in compensating contractors. So I think
Well,
I'm
maybe-
going to have to pass.
I kind of get that. Maybe you should go a different direction for now. So it's good to have you back, Melanie. So we have lots that we can talk about. Kelly, you had stuff on there fired up, baby.
Well, I mean, it's kind of the elephant in the room is DEI is like all DEI under attack. And that was one of the very first things this administration started doing right out of the gate.
Yeah.
Just from your position on the front lines, on what basis are they trying to dismantle DEI and what are the arguments that they're using to even challenge DEI?
You know, I, I'm sorry, I'm a talker and a bit of a storyteller. So I'm going to take this back. I'm going to rewind to my upbringing. I was raised in a household where politics was discussed. I knew what my political leanings were by the time I was like 5 or 6 years old. I was a big Jimmy Carter fan. I actually remember having like fantasies or daydreams about debating Ronald Reagan and, showing him up on the debate stage, because look, even this 9-year-old can beat him in a debate, that sort of thing. And then people wouldn't vote for him. They'd realize he's stupid and his ideas are stupid. But from the Reagan years on, there's been this undercurrent of white supremacy in the Republican Party, in Republican policies, and in Republican talking points. And we all knew that. When I say we all, I mean the Black community. I think there are people within the white community who got it as well, but there are a lot of people in the white community who believed then, and honestly still believe now, that racist means you burn crosses. Racist means you call people the N-word. And that's inaccurate. But with that being the idea of what a racist is, it was very difficult getting white America to understand what they were actually hearing when the new president referred to Black men in the city as bucks, or referred to our cities as jungles, or referred to women who look like me, who, happen to maybe be getting public assistance or any sort of assistance as welfare queens, or the idea that women who look like me just must be welfare queens by definition because our skin is brown.
Yeah.
When the president after that threw Willie Horton up on our television screens as a deterrent to against voting Democratic during that election. I mean, it goes on and on. The reaction to Hurricane Katrina under his son. And then, of course, we don't even need to discuss the things that have come out of Donald Trump's mouth. Through those years, though, up until Trump, I always felt that if the Republicans would just stop with the damn dog whistles and just say the quiet part out loud, people in this country would understand what they're really buying onto or buying into when they vote Republican, when they follow behind people like Reagan, or for that matter, create living, or well, now dead, saints of them, when they idolize these people to such an extent they name airports after them, while these folks have done such damage to communities like mine. All those years I thought, if white America could only hear that quiet part that we hear, or if it could just be said out loud so that they have no choice but to hear it, things would change. And one thing I have learned, and I'm sorry, I'm going to offend a lot of your audience when I say this, but one thing I have learned over the course of my 54 years is that the one thing that we as Black people in this country can rely on white America to do, it's to disappoint us. So when the time came that you finally have this Republican leader who's saying, honestly, all the same things, or most of the same things that others before him, other presidents before him in the Republican Party have said, but he's saying the quiet part out loud. He's not using the dog whistles to say these things. He's not hiding it behind, statistics. The current president is not even trying to hide behind dog whistles. He is not even trying to say the quiet part. He says everything out loud. He telegraphs everything that's in his head. And still, without being able to hide behind, but that's not really what he said, you're being sensitive, which we've always gotten back. Without having statistics, without hiding behind statistics of function within the Black community, without ever bringing up the statistics around the same dysfunction in white communities, which ends up being roughly the same per capita because there are more white folks than Black folks.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard the term white on white violence. That's not
right. And yet it's something that takes place in every white community every day. White on white violence. People tend to commit crimes against and violence against people who they are living most closely with. And we live in a country where the majority of Americans live in communities of people who look like them. So without all of those smoke screens to hide behind, this man doesn't even try to employ the smoke screens. He just comes out and says, this is a white Christian male country. And if you are anyone else, you really need to get to the back. And white America applauds him, votes for him in, large enough numbers to reelect him. Nobody else voted in large enough numbers to reelect him. No other communities in this country did. White people wanted this man when he said those things that I thought would deter all white people from voting for a candidate. So I do not necessarily understand the country I live in, but here I am. Help build it. Actually, I not just help build it, built it. My people built it, but we certainly don't understand it.
I try to be sensitive to at least, I try to give people credit for like, oh, they're, maybe people across the aisle from me are thinking this. And I get accused of giving people like too much leeway because it's like, they're not hiding anything, that it's not that. Because I occasionally hear in kind of more conservative circles, there's a narrative of that racism kind of went away with Lyndon Johnson. And that after that, anybody who brings it back up is race baiting. They're trying to reintroduce racism.
Bring it back up. It's gone.
Everything got evened out.
If I may, a term that was leveled at a friend of mine who's a journalist in the last week was a hammer looking for a nail. That is exactly how Black people have been viewed since the Lyndon Johnson administration. Anytime we have brought up systemic inequities.
And that's when people are like, why does everything have to be about race? Yeah. And then people talking about DEI initiatives as I've heard them referred to as reverse racism. That's like, they're screening out qualified candidates to put in people to check the boxes.
That's right.
Which automatically assumes that anyone who meets any of the criteria for diversity is unqualified, which is, I guess, all the assumptions are so deep in these terms.
It's a self-own. It is very much a racist self-own when someone says, well, no, I think the most qualified candidate should be hired. That's a racist self-own. The fact that you're automatically assuming that this person who is not a white man could not be the most qualified candidate. I mean, you're telling on yourself. You're snitching on yourself. You're putting on your white hood for everyone to see. Same thing when you say, but we should be basing employment on merit. Okay, let's do that. Black women outpace every other demographic in this country in terms of acquisition of college degrees. Let's base it on merit. White men now enter college at lower rates than white women.
Yeah.
White men now perform far worse academically at the K-12 level than white women do, or white boys rather than white girls do.
Yeah.
White men are the single group in this country that's seen, well, I would say men in general, but especially white men are really losing ground in terms of having been at one point the most educated population in this country, having been at one point the most academically successful population in this country. And not we, because I didn't build this system. White men created a system that valued higher education. White men created a system that valued academic success, and those things directly led you into a workplace in which you had opportunities that other people did not. And because colleges were able to, at that time, that this system was created, the system that we call professional America or executive level America or white collar jobs. When white men created all of that, there were limits on how many Jewish people could attend Johns Hopkins University and other, really prestigious colleges. Many of those colleges didn't take Black people at all.
Right. And
Many of those colleges did not take women at all. So white men created a system where people who had access to those tools needed to be successful within that system were almost all white men. When they entered the workforce, they only had to compete against other white men.
Right.
White men are now 34% of our population, which, by the way, is a minority. White men are a minority in the United States of America. At that point, I don't know what the demographics were. I don't know what the numbers were, but considering, again, just the word male or man, I'm pretty sure that they were, even at that point, a minority population, country, white men. So this was a minority that crafted an entire system to ensure that only people within their minority would have access to the opportunities to gain wealth and to gain authority, to gain power, because often those families that attained the most financial success then moved into what they called public service, what I call power. That's why if you look back, George Bush comes from enormous wealth. The Kennedys, the Kennedy presidents, and now whatever we want to call RFK Jr., these people come, once all the money has been amassed, the next step is power. Trump is another perfect example of that. So this is all a system that has been built by white men for white men. When things changed, when laws changed, and suddenly people like me had access, people in the intersection of being Black and female, the two things that are complete antithesis of white and male. And Asian folks got access, and Latinx folks got access, or Latine folks, and Pacific Islanders got access, and Native Americans got access, and white women got access. And suddenly it's a whole different ballgame. And those rules that the white men established, you get that higher education, you attain that academic success, and the doors to that executive lounge fly open for you after years of hard work, became myth. And not only did it become a myth because, suddenly it's, we don't want to accommodate all of these others in this thing. We're not members of that club. We're not supposed to be members of that club. And if you take a look at the Fortune 500 and who runs those companies, somehow, all of those people, those women with more academic success than the men, these Black women who have, all of these higher education degrees, all of these different groups, Asian folks who have been so successful in this country that it's become a stereotype, and a stereotype that often works against them as a community. All of these groups we've seen the success, we've, witnessed this, but somehow they can't get to that top echelon. They are not running the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, not only in ways that would match their success, but in terms of academics and college or work history, but also not able to reach those areas in terms of just acceptance once they are in those doors. It's made very clear this space is not for you. So at this point, white men who are not born into wealth are meeting a lot of those same ceilings, I'll put it, that people of color are and that women are. Because when the rich white men close the door, they close the door on the poor white men too. They close the door on everybody.
Yeah.
And what happens when you close the door on one group that has always been told that they're the ones who hold the keys to the kingdom?
Absolutely.
They rebel. And that's this is a white boy revolution that we are living through right now.
Yeah.
And that is what DEI, the end of DEI is. It is them finally saying the quiet part out loud instead of, well, I'm not sure if you have the qualifications, because now you clearly have the qualifications. I'm not sure that you have the work history. Well, now we clearly, I mean, Black women and women in general have been in the professional space now for 50 years. So
Mhm.
while 30 years ago, even, you could have said, well, these men have more experience in the workplace than you do. My generation, Gen X, put an end to that. We started on what we were at least told was equal footing with the
Mhm.
men in our generation as professionals. And we were the first generation that really had that opportunity.
Yeah.
And somehow the white boys still rose to the top. And now that those
Mhm.
things are being questioned in a way where they can't write them off in the way that they historically have. And by they, I mean the wealthy white men. I mean the ones who run corporations. I mean the men from the wealthy families who then go into the power business and become senators and become governors and become presidents. Now that they
Mhm.
can't use any of those excuses for why that ceiling exists for the rest of us, they're going to just say, they're now saying it out loud because we don't think you're competent if you are not a white man, a white cisgender man. You
Mhm.
simply don't have the competence.
Well,
That
that's
is
what
what this
of course,
is.
that's not true. You do have the competence.
You don't
But
have
so
to
you're
tell me
saying
that.
that, so that it is the DEI/woke that's the cudgel they're going to use to answer to this. I
But I'm
love,
saying it's not even just a cudgel that they're using.
yeah.
I mean, if you look at the way that they describe it, they are telling on themselves. What they are saying is if you are a woman, if you are queer, if you are a person of color, especially BIPOC, you are where you are because, yes, they're saying you are where you are because of your race, because of your gender, etc. Because if you're not a white man, you simply are not capable of being a good hire. You're not capable of being as intelligent
So you're saying they believe their own
as good a
shit.
leader.
Is that what you're saying? You're positing that they believe their own shit, that everybody else is not white, cisgender, hetero is secondary to that.
I think it's what they have to believe in. I think they
You
have
know,
to believe that. They have to cling to something.
and
And
it
at
is.
this point,
Mm.
all of their excuses have been found to be either erroneous or just complete fabrications. You know,
Mhm.
they have nothing else. All they have now to cling to is just, well, my gut tells me. That's why this term keeps being used, common sense. I don't know if you've noticed this. The right's answer to everything now that has to do with BIPOC folks, has to do with feminism, has to do with the trans community. It's all written off as common sense. Well,
Mm.
why is it, that you feel that you should, stop doing any sort of medical research that involves women's bodies? Well, it's just common sense. Because I'm just going from common sense. I've heard Donald Trump say this multiple times to television reporters. And I've heard conservatives who I know personally use this phrase increasingly during the fall of last year, during that sort of leg of once Kamala came in, frankly, around that. I heard that word common sense used a lot as if it is the opposite of
Mm.
progress, as if it's the opposite of diversity or equity or inclusion, as if it's the progress of women having bodily autonomy. Common sense is the thing that they keep trotting out. And
Mm.
pardon me, what that means is this is the thing I've always known. This is the thing I've always seen. This is the thing I was taught from childhood. And if you think that white people don't teach their children supremacy from childhood, you are wrong. When your children see in their world that the only people of color, or especially the only BIPOC people in their world, are people who are in service in some way, they're pushing a broom, they're running a cash register, they're a nanny or a babysitter, but they're always somehow in positions where they are under and answerable to white people. When the I'm sorry, not Asian folks actually often, not always, often escape this. When the only Hispanic folks you see or Latino folks you see are taking care of your lawns or cleaning your house or, doing other jobs that are basically to make the lives of the white folks easier, what
Mm.
and you don't ever stop to talk to your children at that point about what racism is, and that not all brown people are being paid to make your life easier. And in fact, that's not their role in society either. Same thing for Latino people. I mean, when you don't take the time to have these conversations with your children while modeling a system of white supremacy for your children. And by the way, just raising them in this country, they're having systems of white supremacy modeled for them constantly.
Yeah, they
So
are.
Like you have
Yeah.
to go out of your way to intentionally.
Yeah, it's always
if you
Problem.
don't go out of your way to intentionally talk to your children about race and racial equity, then you are contributing to the problem that is white
Yeah,
supremacy.
even well-meaningly, it's like my old the cliche that my mom taught me is the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Absolutely.
Meaning that you actually do have to have this conversation, and you're absolutely right. As you were sharing, I was thinking, well, okay, I'm Gen X, right? Early Gen X. And how I was brought up in the Midwest, Missouri with my parents, only kid. We never talked about race, but then also I was just very fortunate that we were not in a circumstance to where that I have loving parents. I'm fortunate to have loving parents, and I was exposed just by school. So, and because there was an innocence that came with it, but that innocence is gone. There is no such thing as that. This
No.
was something that was a product of the 70s and 80s.
Right.
That ship has sailed.
When
I have
when-
white male friends who grew up
Yeah.
in very white regions of the country,
Yeah.
maybe in the Midwest or whatever. And growing up, I see what you're talking about, is I do
Yeah.
see that in some of my white male friends who are my age, who grew
Yeah.
up in areas where there were no Black people to speak of, or no Hispanic people, or no Asian people for that matter, where everybody was white. And
Yep.
because of that, there weren't a lot of conversations about race one way or the other. So coming into a more diverse setting, it was culture shock for them, for sure.
Oh,
And I'm
absolutely.
certainly not saying that I'm
Yep.
not saying they didn't bring any racist ideas or myths or
Well,
thoughts
using
with
it
them.
here.
But
Absolutely.
it's not to the extent of the teaching of not to the extent that someone might get when they grow up in a more racially mixed setting without being taught those things. But
Amen.
that has definitely changed. And I'm going to tell you a story. My in-laws, my husband's white. My
Yeah.
in-laws live in an almost entirely white section of Maine, which is an almost entirely white state.
Yeah.
They live in the part of the state that is Trumpy, which a lot of Maine is not, but they're in a pretty MAGA section. And one of the biggest problems, and keep in mind that, again, this is like your upbringing. It's white kids going to school with other white kids for the most part. It's not, with it being the 2020s, there are there's like a very light sprinkling of kids of color, probably as many as you could count on your fingers.
Yep.
Entire high school.
Sounds very familiar to me.
Yeah, it does. Same here,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah.
But one of the biggest issues that they have, that my brother-in-law, who's an assistant principal, has shared with me that they are having, is the great love of the word nigger being used frequently by these white kids.
What is that about? What is that? This insanity of this.
These kids are harboring a tremendous amount of racial hatred, despite the fact that they have not really spent much time at all around, or if any time at all, around people of color. And, our theory in the past as to why the South had more racial violence was always that, the South had more people of color.
Yeah.
And therefore, white people saw us as more of a threat. We had numbers, whereas in the North, where we don't have numbers, although Maine also has a history of an island that was taken from African Americans who had fled slavery, and they were, I believe they were murdered, but the island was taken from them. I mean, most states have some sort of a story of a horrible, violent racial event, but we hear much less of it in the North because the numbers were smaller. That's what we kind of always felt, whatever. But social media and 24-hour news,
Absolutely,
and et cetera, YouTube videos.
It's a YouTube.
But
If you are a white boy living in America, it's not hard for you to stumble across all of the
oh my God,
racist
no, but Melanie, it's so prevalent. Now, mind you, I live up in the Heights, right? So, but I just like the other day, like where I get my hair cut, man, I am a token white dude in the hood, right? And so but there was every time I'm in the hood, I like hear all of these kids using the N-word, like, and they use it with a certain pride. And I'm like, oh, so is it white kids that are glomming onto that coolness of that, where it's become perversely cool?
No. It's okay. First of all, I don't know. I assume most of these white boys who are using this word, and I say boys because in my
Literally,
experience,
yeah,
it's been
like,
mostly boys, but there are women too.
yeah.
There are white women who use that word, that term as well.
Are there? Okay.
I
But
don't
I
think
agree with you. It's
they,
typically a male thing. Yeah.
yeah, there are women who do it
Yeah.
too. I really don't think that they are really thinking about the history of the word. They're not
Oh,
thinking
definitely.
about, no,
I
they're not
agree.
thinking about the fact that when Black people reclaimed that word,
Yeah.
the reason that they hear that word being used between Black people amongst each other,
Yes.
why they hear Black people use that word in songs,
Mm.
is because of that reclamation. And
Right.
not every Black person,
Right.
we are not a monolith, and not every Black person agrees with that reclamation. And to be honest, over the course of my life, I've been in different places with that word and its reclamation. We don't always agree with ourselves even
Yeah.
about
Yeah. Yeah.
that particular word,
Yeah.
but that's a word. It's been used so horribly against us
Yeah.
that when people in my community use it, it's typically used in a sense of, you know what, this is how the world sees us, but we know we're something more. And that's really what that word has come to sort of mean when Black people use it amongst each other. When a white person uses that word, I don't care if you call yourself an ally. I don't care if your baby daddy is Black. I don't care how many Black women you have been engaged to or married. I don't care if your best friend is Black or if all your buddies are Black or all your coworkers use that word. If you have white skin, that is not a word that should be leaving your mouth
I agree.
ever.
You
Ever.
you back at it.
And I do believe also that a good number of the young white men who are obsessed with using that word
Yep.
are obsessed with it because they are not used to being told no. They're not used to having anything not be for them. This is why the FCC received thousands of letters from white people angry because Kendrick Lamar didn't have any white backup dancers or performers at the Super Bowl.
Are you serious?
Because,
That really?
oh yes, that happened. The
Yeah.
FCC got
Yeah,
all these complaints about the absence of whiteness on that Super Bowl stage. You are not, it is like almost basic, it's
Oh,
practically
my.
illegal in this country
Oh
to
my God.
exclude
Great.
white people from
Yeah.
something. I had
Yeah.
a dear friend who is a gay man, and I was one of those people out there, a warrior for marriage equality. And one day my friend, and he's a white gay man, David sat me down. He said, Melanie, let me explain to you why marriage equality happened. He said, somebody told white boys that there was something they couldn't have. And that's why we have marriage equality.
I do not disagree with you at all on that. Being one of those white gay male, and because we are in the right position to drive a lot of this and the money and the politics that goes all to that. Yeah.
Mhm.
Now, are we in the clear? Oh my God, no, because we're seeing the huge blowback that threatens that, and we'll see how they
I'm
attack.
aware.
Yeah,
aware.
right.
I
Yeah.
mean, and that's the most frustrating thing about this moment.
Yeah.
Seeing so much that we have. I mean, I can say we now. There was a time where I would have felt like I was like it was stolen valor, but I'm 54.
Mhm.
You know, I'm not trying to sound like a badass here, but like I remember taking my daughter to the African American History Museum about a year after it opened because it was really hard to get in for that first year. And my daughter was 14 at the time, and she said, "Wow, it's so weird to be in DC without protesting." So, you know, this was our way of life, was protest. You know, taking my children to protest. I raised my kids to protest. This was our way of life. And to be in a moment now where I don't even know why protest is taking place, if I'm going to be honest. The whole point is to get the ear and the attention of people at the top who can then understand your anger and make a difference.
Yeah.
This man's not had any differences.
why there were so many critiques of the hands-off protests a couple weeks ago. I saw online, I saw a
There's
number of,
critiques about hands.
yeah, I saw a
I
number
have critiques, but I'm with
and they were all from Black people that I
Oh,
know.
yeah.
I think they were almost exclusively from Black women who were like, that was the most convenient looking, latte carrying Saturday picnic of a
Yes.
protest we've ever
Yes.
seen.
It
What
was a farce.
the hell was that? Like,
It was
what?
a- So
Oh.
let me say this. I
Yeah.
applaud white people for the effort. I'll just go with that, for the
Yeah,
effort.
sure.
Mhm.
You got out of your houses and I mean, I know that sounds condescending, but I'm being real. I'm being real. Because honestly, what I'm seeing with the white community, with white liberals, is
Oh.
willingness to care about it, but not a whole lot of a willingness to do something about it.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So the fact that the fact that white, comfortable, liberal people in cities, because if you look at most cities, most white people who live in cities are middle class to affluent. Poor white people generally, with the exception of maybe Chicago and definitely parts of Baltimore, but
Yep.
most white people who live in large cities are middle class and above.
No, you're absolutely right.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
you're-
for these comfortable white people, financially comfortable, physically
Yeah.
comfortable,
Yeah.
in terms of their safety in this country,
Yeah.
comfortable, to get up and go out and do that, yay, I'm happy about that. Now we got to do better. So now we have the first step. Now that you've dipped your toe in the water, my questions are multiple. One, what's the next step?
Mhm.
Two, when are you going to actually make some noise? Because yes, the convenience of it was an issue. With
That it was like on a
one of the
Saturday
reasons they
that
were so
everyone's-
angry at us who marched during Black Lives Matter, and back when Freddie Gray here in Baltimore was killed,
Mhm.
when we all went out, and well, not we, that actually was more of a children's march, but when the youth went out and marched after Freddie Gray, but during all of Black Lives Matter, when we all would go out and march, one of the many complaints, vehement complaints that we got was, you're holding up traffic. People are trying to get places. This is a work day. Why do you have to do this on a day where it's going to disrupt things? And that's what you're supposed to do.
Oh my God, Melanie, you're so true.
What are you disrupting on a freaking Saturday, standing outside of a building? For God's sake.
So Melanie,
If you're not breaking shit, you're not doing it right. And by the way, Black people, we keep saying you're lucky we weren't there because look how you didn't meet with any violence. But you know why you didn't meet with any violence? There wasn't going to be any. They knew y'all weren't serious. They knew that you guys you weren't going to block streets. You weren't going to inconvenience anybody. No shopkeepers were going to lose business. In fact, they were going to gain business.
That's right.
Because the people who went to the protests are going to
special.
want to buy some Starbucks.
Yeah,
And they might stop in to buy a cute hat. So it actually, what were you disrupting?
It's just, you know what they were disrupting? Any internalized guilt that they might have and their some desire to be an ally. I am.
I hate to sing ding, but I'm looking at the turning of the hour.
I know, Melanie. God, weird.
I feel like we could go like 5 hours. Like, I still want to get in. So, what do we do with DEI now? And
so,
if you want part two, I'm willing.
Well, then we're going to do that. So, we'll say to our listeners now, because you have said so much, you unpacked so much in there that each point needs to be teased out. And I'm going to give a quick laundry list so that we can make it as our tease to the next time we get back together. Okay. So first of all, I want to talk about the N word in reclamation as compared to what is happening within the queer community, reclaiming queer. And I think there's probably some parallel paths there, but I really want to understand more of that. And then also keep on this far you're talking, because you're more speaking truth to power that is very uncomfortable to a lot of folks. And I just will include our listeners. I don't think you're going to offend them. If anything else, I'm pretending you do a lot of enlightenment from your point of view, but there's more to be said here.
And if you don't mind, I actually want to add a couple things to that. One is plan. Like what things, like absolutely. When say for this most recent protest, but in general, like Democrats and liberals and progressives are scrambling to be like, what do we do to, look at historical protests, look at what has worked before, to actually have a plan rather than just like, hey, let's just go out and make noise. And then finally, and this might be something more for us and folks that look like me will ruminate on, is there are a bunch of white boys out there who are completely untethered, who, you know, for the last 30 years have heard two different stories. They're like, we are in power, but we're also intrinsically evil. Like, and there isn't a middle ground of like, what's my real identity? So they're latching on to these, like, there's crazy people who are like, we're going to bring it back, you know?
Well, Kelly, if I can also point out, they're being told that they're in power, yes. But then they're also being told that they are disempowered by people who look like me.
Absolutely.
So they're simultaneously in power and oppressed.
Like you're being replaced by
a radical dissonance going on with that. And so and there's something else we still have to talk about, throw some faith in here, because that's what we do on Radical Love Life.
Got to have faith.
We got to have faith. George Michael. To absolutely talk about how that is driving this white Christian identity. And I'm going to tease this out about Denise Spencer. We recorded recently. She has a book called Faith Unleavened, where she goes into this, and in our conversation specifically, how white folks in particular, their identity is all wrapped up in very superficial things, and why DEI in woke is so threatening to them, just in that kind of case as well.
But
so
can I point out that Jesus was walking DEI? Jesus was, I talk to everybody. Pardon my language, but if you're a relative of mine watching this, I apologize, but I'm just going to use the lingo. Jesus fucked with everybody. Jesus was never like, you're a prostitute, you stay over there. You're a leper, you're from another religion? Not me, not the kid. That was never Jesus. Jesus said, I don't care who you are. I am in fellowship with you.
Eunuch, sure.
Jesus also went into the temple and tossed some tables around because of the systemic inequity that was taking place in his country. So I'm sorry, Jesus was a leftist, number one.
Yes,
number two, the problem I'm seeing with white liberals, and I feel like I've been very hard on white liberals during this show.
That's okay.
But you know what? And I'm also going to say real fast, I'm going to give props though to my friend Nancy, who's a white woman. The day of the protest, she said, but Melanie, I really don't understand what we do this on a weekday when we could. And I was like, oh my God, somebody gets it. Somebody who's not Black gets it. So shout out to Nancy. Anyway, though, moving on to I've been very hard on white liberals. But I also understand these two things. Number one, you don't really have much of a playbook to go by, because you don't, a lot of what we are dealing with right now is looking at our history as Black people and trying to use it as a blueprint to try to figure out what's coming next and how to deal with things. You don't have a blueprint for oppression. It's just, I think, why you always, as a community, seem to be pushing us to the front, and this time we refuse to go to the front, and you all seem a little lost. The other thing with that is, I think, honestly, if you root the plan, because there has to be a plan. You've got to come up with a plan. You can't just march. There's got to be a plan. We had a plan. There was work. There's work that has to be done. But if you follow the Jesus playbook, Jesus gave you a playbook for resistance and for revolt. He really did. If you just read the sections in red and you look at it really as through a political, a disempowered and oppressed people lens. The other piece of that is you also have a wonderful blueprint from the anti-war movement of the 1960s. Talk to your grandparents, talk to your maybe parents if you're my age and you're white, but talk to your people. Ask them what they did. They disrupted a lot. They got stuff done. Y'all can do it. I have faith in you.
Thank you, Melanie. We're going to have to get you back here soon because we've got a whole laundry list of stuff that we've got to. And I see that our next guest, Reverend Starlet Thomas, has joined us. I actually
signing off.
You're not that far apart. I would love for the two of you to meet one another.
You should.
Let me know when and where.
So, Yeah. All right. Well, Melanie, thank you so much for taking time.
For having me
And,
again.
Yeah, we got to get you back soon because we got
We
a
will.
lot,
Yeah, we're
got
gonna
a
pick
lot to
this up.
share. Thank you.
Bye, fellas.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Radical Love Live, hosted by Mark Dilcom and Kelly Wilson. Recorded at the Bravery Studios in Garfield, New Jersey. All rights reserved. Find our episodes on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. And check us out at radicallovelive.com, along with our personal websites at markdilcom.com and kellywilson.com. This is Radical Love Live, where we explore faith outside the boxes.
If you've ever deconstructed your faith, you know it's not easy. But just imagine if you could have people to guide you through your process. People like Jim Palmer, Kristen Dumais, Jennifer Knapp, Brad Jerzak, Brian Zand, Paul Young, and more. Well, if you head over to www.choiracademy.com and register for Square 2 using the promo code RAD, you'll get 10% off the regular registration cost of this awesome course and community just for being a fan of our show.
Embark on a journey to the heart of an isolated and restrictive island where secrets simmer beneath the surface. In Brandon Andrus's What Can't Be Hidden, follow Thura as she uncovers the dark truths of Patrida, navigating through betrayal and redemption. This tale of courage, love, and the quest for freedom will captivate you from the very first page. Get What Can't Be Hidden available now from Choir Publishing.
This Choircast podcast is brought to you by my book, Unless a Seed Falls to the Ground, Welcoming the Death of the Whiteness Gospel. I wrote this story as a plea for white Christian America to enter into a season of hospice spirituality, to recover from the cancerous lie that we can start over, be in charge, and recover some original purity of Christianity. One friend calls it a love story to the church, the United States, and the entire human family. It's available now on Amazon.
Are you ready to embrace a deeper, more intentional way of living? Introducing Deep Calls to Deep, Meditations for Your Spiritual Journey, Volume 1 by Brandon Andrus. Deep Calls to Deep offers a 1.5 years of weekly meditations to inspire spiritual growth and guide you toward a more meaningful, embodied life. Order your copy today wherever books are sold and begin your journey into greater connection and purpose. Deep Calls to Deep. Let your soul awaken.